This is Let Me Be Frank, Bishop Caggiano's weekly platform to speak to featured guests and to speak directly to you. We're on 1350 AM and 103.9 FM in Connecticut, on Sirius XM, on YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts, including on the Veritas Catholic Network mobile app on your phone. We're sponsored by Foundations in Faith, and February's focus is on the St. John Paul II Fund. This fund supports Diocese of Bridgeport parishes that have innovative approaches to faith formation programs. Through the JP2 Fund, Foundations in Faith aims to support all generations when it comes to learning about and cultivating our Catholic faith. To learn more about the JP2 Fund and all the work of Foundations in Faith, go online to foundationsinfaith.org. Okay, here we go. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. I'm Steve Lee, and it is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Good morning, Steve.
Hey, Excellency.
As always, it's a
yes.
pleasure. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. We have a topic today and a guest who's going to talk about something that's very dear to your heart. Ever since you landed here at the diocese, you've been really focusing on young people and young adults.
Without a doubt, it is, and it's of course I think it's a concern that almost everyone has. Right? It's not just unique to me because they are, as I used to say at the NFCYM when I was the chaplain. They're not the future of the church. They're the present of the church, right? They're here. They need to be here with us. They're part of our family. Anyway, so Anna, I'm looking forward to our conversation. Very much so.
Yeah. So let me give a proper introduction. And I guess I should say, my wife Rula often looks at me and she's like, when I'll say something or want to do something, she's like, "You're not a young adult anymore." I'm like, "What?" She's right, though.
We've been trying to tell you that for a long time.
Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Anna Moreland. Anna is a professor of humanities at Villanova University, where she is also the Anne Quinn Welsh Endowed Chair and Director of the University Honors Program. And I'd like to add that Anna and I also share an alma mater. She received her master's and her PhD in systematic theology from Boston College. I only got a bachelor's from there, but Anna has written a couple books. She's the author of 3 books. So we have Known by Nature, Thomas Aquinas on Natural Knowledge of God, and then also Muhammad Reconsidered, a Christian Perspective on Islamic Prophecy, and the book we're going to talk about mostly today, the Young Adult Playbook, Living Like It Matters. And so thank you so much for joining us on Let Me Be Frank, Anna.
Steve, I'm delighted to be with you here and with Your Excellency.
Oh my gosh, I'm delighted as well. And we have much to talk about because you have a very interesting background. Just those books alone shows that you have a large spectrum, and which we may, if we have time, I'd love to explore the Islamic prophecy and the whole question of Islam. But before we get there, tell us about Anna Moreland, your journey of life, your journey of faith.
Great. So thank you. It's hard not to take up the whole hour, but I am the child of Argentine parents. My parents married in Buenos Aires, Argentina in the 1960s. And during those days, if you married a non-Catholic, you had to sign a form saying you were committed to raising your children Catholic, which my father did, signed the form, that is. And we were 4 children who grew up mostly in the United States. We moved here when we were young. And my father did follow through on that commitment. We went to Mass every Sunday, and we went to Catholic school for grade school. And I might have been the only one who appreciated those first 8 years of Catholic education, but I had a really formative, both Catholic education, but also experience in my home parish. The 2 home parishes we were part of were really incredible, with a great community, great priests. And the second parish had a Latin American community as well. So we went to Spanish Mass on Sunday evenings. And that was incredibly formative for me. And I had a very healthy family background, even if it wasn't kind of thickly Catholic in the way that a lot of people have. And I wanted to go to Catholic college, but my father said, I'm sorry, Catholic high school. My father said, Anna, we need to repave the driveway. So I went to the local public high school. We had a long driveway. And then I wanted to go to Catholic college, but my father taught at University of Maryland. So I went to Maryland for free and studied philosophy because I wanted to study theology. And I think in part it was in high school, I was involved with pro-life activities. And I'd say the moral teachings of the church were a steadfast pillar for me throughout my high school experience. So then I studied philosophy in college and pre-internet. I tell my students this story and they can't believe, it's hard for them to imagine. I assumed I would continue studying philosophy, but my honors thesis director told me that I should study theology because I'm, of course, a Catholic believer and philosophy departments around the country are pretty radically secular. And so I said, okay, I didn't do a Google search. I just took his advice. And then I asked him where to apply because I had no idea. He gave me the name of the 5 places. I went back to Argentina at that point and lived with my grandmother for a year. But then when I got into these places, I called him back up and said, so where should I go? He told me where to go. And at Boston College, that Steve also already mentioned, I really found who I wanted to be. I found a group of friends that I wanted to be around. Boston College was just a transformative experience for me. Graduate school is so lonely for so many people. And I just had an incredible Jesuit priest who formed us in a really holistic way. And I owe so much to Father Michael Buckley and to so many of the both faculty and Jesuits at BC while I was there. And that's where I met my husband. And now we're raising 4 children in the faith.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's great. What a great story. Now, do you still have relatives in Argentina?
All of them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All of them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of similar to mine. Like almost all my relatives on my mother's side were in Italy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Wow. So your education is now teaching is your life in many ways.
My life. That's right.
So how do you read the temperature in the classroom in 2025 with young people? Because we're obviously young people are a great love of yours, but how do you read the temperature?
So that's a great question. I have found that students arrive to college really prepared in a lot of impressive ways, way more impressive than when we went to school. Very organized, very studious, incredibly smart, really well informed. So really overprepared in some ways, but pretty radically underprepared in other ways. Namely, they're underprepared to ask those identity questions of who am I? Who do I want to believe? Who do I want to become? What do I believe? There's pretty foundational questions about adulthood. What do I want to do for work? Those are really important questions to ask, and students come pretty underprepared to college to answer those questions. And then the collegiate environment isn't always very healthy and doesn't always help students ask those really foundational identity questions. It gets them to rush through professional discernment, for example, and delay any questions about romantic relationships. So I find the collegiate environment a challenge for these really bright students and who are seeking, they really are seeking the good, the true, and the beautiful. And they're seeking for something that the culture isn't offering. They are exhausted by their phones. They want something else. They're asking great questions. And we just have to have the courage to just give them the rich vocabulary of the Catholic tradition.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating the way you describe it. Something clicked in my mind, and perhaps this is not the case, so please critique. But if religion and the questions of faith are many times the ultimate questions, as more and more young people at earlier and earlier age are disaffiliated from faith, that must contribute to the lack of addressing these questions when there's so much distraction. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair, for sure.
Yeah. In which case, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
The more they're distracted, the more they're not going to address the questions.
Yes. No, that's absolutely right. But the hunger is still there.
Oh,
The
yeah.
hunger is very much there.
Right.
And it just takes adults who care about them and are willing to listen.
Right. So is that the reason you wrote the Young Adult Playbook?
Yeah, so the Young Adult Playbook I co-wrote with Tom Smith, who was a longtime colleague, and now he's Dean of Arts and Sciences at Catholic U. We had been listening to students for decades and had been growingly concerned, honestly, about them. And so we developed this series of courses to help them adapt to college, to walk intentionally through their 4 years, and then prepare them to live a flourishing life beyond college. And the first time I taught this course called Shaping an Adult Life for seniors, I felt like I had put my finger on the raw nerve of my students' lives. The response to that course was almost visceral. Now, I'm really successful in the classroom. I love teaching, but this course something happened in it that hadn't happened in any other course. And so I walked into my friend Tom's office and said, Tom, do you want to write a book with me? Because I realized I wanted to reach students that I couldn't teach. And he said, sure. And we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. But we started writing this book together about 5 years ago. And it was really a graced experience. We have a lot of respect for each other. We have a long friendship. And we read every word of the book aloud to each other. And we complemented each other's strengths. And so the book it deals with 3 building blocks of a flourishing life, work, and it helps students dig more deeply, not just sort of, can I get a job, but what job am I called to? Leisure, which gets students to think about how they spend their leisure time as much as how they spend their study or work time, which is really not something that students don't even know how to spell leisure. So it really kind of rocks their world when they realize that how they spend their leisure time molds them and shapes them as much as how they spend their study time. And then the most popular part of the book is on romance. And it's the part that they're most hungry for, in some ways most resistant to. But we try to resurrect the lost script of dating. And in a way that, of course, updates a lot of things for them, but in a way that gets them to actually move their anxieties into the back seat and their hopes and dreams into the driver's seat, and gets them to try to pursue a romantic relationship in a way that's healthy and life-giving and safe, quite frankly.
Right. So now let's go deeper on door number 3.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that they resist it. It initially may. Why do you think that is the case?
So honestly, both the university climate, their parents, so many voices in their lives are telling them, work yourself out first, get a good paying job, get your professional life in order, graduate from college, don't let anything distract you. College is so expensive, you can't afford to be distracted by a relationship, right? So part of it are these adult voices that I think are not helpful. Another part of it is the relationships they see on campus are these quasi-marital, all-absorbing relationships, and nobody wants one of those, because you end up sacrificing your friendships in order to lock in on this young woman or young man. And so the relationships that actually happen on campus are just too intense. And they're afraid of their erotic longings. It's a hard thing to control. It just is. And they don't have the sort of regular markers maybe that we had growing up. So a lot of them, I mean, the social scientific data shows that they are not hooking up at the rates that students were hooking up, certainly when I was going to college. a lot of them are just opting out from just romantic ventures at all. I mean, they're hooked on porn, so it's not like they're chaste, but I think it's the area of deepest disarray on college campuses, this area around romantic relationships. I have a lot more to say about it.
Oh, no, I want to hear what you have to say about it, because you had mentioned, well, of course, we all know, and anybody, for example, among those who are ordained priests, when you hear confessions, any pornography is just, it's an epidemic. It is. Yeah. It's astonishing. And of course, the digital content makes it so easy and so available, yeah, so accessible. I mean, it's just, but what about, I'm intrigued. So if you step away from the whole question because you're being told profession and establish yourself and when they see romantic relationships, this is all absorbing. So I don't want that either. Is there another factor in so much as young people, particularly teenagers in this digitized world, don't really have a healthy self-image?
Absolutely. That's a huge problem. And of course, the comparison cage that is social media really feeds into that. So they come to us with a lot of self-esteem issues, in particular, the young women. I think the young women suffer from it. I mean, and again, the social scientific data bears this out. The young women come to us with some real self-esteem issues and self-image issues, because they're curating their image all day long and posting and liking. And it's like a part-time job, their relationship to their phones. I find it exhausting just listening to it, but it definitely shapes their social landscape, their imaginative landscape, and is deeply corrosive to who they are as human beings.
Right. Yeah, Steve and I have talked about this at other times. And of course, even within the priests here, we've talked about it. It's self-worth. It's external. You find it from the outside rather than from the inside. And if you don't find the still point from the inside, that's then right, you're just lost to the waves of life, right? Whatever happens to be acceptable or whatever happens to be popular is where you go towards, and you become like a ship without an anchor, and it's a terrible place to be at.
It is, and so they get busier and busier and busier because they can't sit still and be alone with their thoughts, because their thoughts are toxic.
Yeah. So how do we help them? Like, how do we help them to get beyond that?
So, well, the romance part of the book is the most popular in some ways. The leisure part of the book is the most unexpectedly transformative, because when they start to think about the leisure practices that they've lost in the productivity machine that is college, they realize they used to do things when they were children or young teenagers. They have these healthy leisure practices that have been totally squashed, and they can resurrect them. So the leisure part of the book is a lot about sort of recovery and remembering, and reaching out to friends because they are so lonely. The epidemic of loneliness is jaw-dropping. But it's a process of, we encourage them to reach out in a community of friends and rehabilitate and recover these leisure practices. We have an image, the leisure garden, that it's pruning and weeding, and the leisure garden from all this technology is really important, and protecting it from the super predator that is their phones is important. But just as important is an attention to what plants they want to plant in their leisure garden. And once we get them to focus on the planting and basically the replanting, they used to play pickup basketball, or they used to do puzzles, or they used to paint. That then is life-giving. And they come to see that process of replanting, it involves an interior shift. And so we introduce the language of Sabbath, for example. And it involves an interior shift. A lot of our students aren't mass goers, but the vocabulary of the Sabbath, they can incorporate it into their daily or weekly lives. And it sounds new to them. So they're able to think about a time to plant healthy leisure practices that are just for themselves, are not just instrumental to, recharging their work battery. They commit to these ascetic practices and commit to planting practices, weeding practices, and planting practices. And these little changes, they have pretty profound effects. It's like when Meg Jay, who's a social psychologist, she's a psychologist at University of Virginia. She has this great image about a plane that's leaving Washington Reagan National Airport, and those are young adults at the beginning of the journey, and they're headed to California, they're headed to the West Coast. And if we can course correct a little bit as they're taking off, it makes a huge difference. Like they either go to LA or Seattle. And if they delete Instagram for a week and realize how many hours they've caught, how many hours all of a sudden their week has, that's a huge course correction. Some students don't put Instagram back on their phones. And then honestly, like their lives are different. So the leisure section is about these small course corrections that have a huge benefit on that West Coast. And there are a lot of these journal exercises throughout the book that help students not just absorb, but help them sort of put into practice what we're asking them to do. And the book is laced with student stories, and it's not just this middle-aged voice, because honestly, I wouldn't want to listen to myself for hours on end either. But it's threaded through with the stories of our own students. And so they feel recognized and seen through their stories. And then their parents or their therapists or the high school counselors who read the book come to understand young people more because they're able to recognize their loved ones. And I receive emails from adults who have read this book and said, oh my gosh, that sounds just like my niece. I have to give this to my niece. And so it gives adults a window into what seems sometimes like a black box. Not everyone spends all their days with 18 to 22-year-olds like I do, right? So anyway, sorry, I kind of over-answered that question.
No, I think it's tremendous. It reminded me of when I was in grammar school, believe it or not, the Dominican sisters. Sister Thomas Bridget used to tell us about having an avocation or avocations. And at the time, I thought this was crazy. I mean, I did what I did. But in a sense, to have that leisure, to have those activities that are wholesome and really holy in some ways.
Yeah.
Right? So you also mentioned about the Sabbath. Now, this is a challenge for all of us. Unfortunately, many Christians have reduced the observance of the Lord's resurrection day just going to Mass, if that, but presumably we're going to Mass. And the rest of the day looks no different than any other day. And in a sense, if I understand what you're suggesting, it would seem that it's not just for young adults, this is for everybody. Everybody needs to do this, right?
That is exactly right. And when we talk around the country about this book, part of what we do is we have adults, like the first step is to look within. I mean, look at my own relationship to my own phone. Look at my own way of practicing the Sabbath. I mean, and each time I teach this course, I use it as an opportunity to look within as well, because we are as addicted, maybe not as addicted, but it's pretty astonishing how our phones, it's just, I mean, they're addictive devices.
Yeah, and purposely done. And purposely created to do that.
Absolutely purposely created to do. And we're all victims of it. But at least you and I weren't raised in the environment. So our formative years weren't shaped around this technology. So in some ways, we've got more responsibility to be deeper role models.
Right. Exactly. Well, when we come back from the break, we have much more to talk about.
Yep. Yeah. So this is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network with Bishop Frank Caggiano. His Excellency is speaking with Anna Moreland, the author of the Young Adult Playbook, Living Like It Matters, and we'll be right back.
Hello, this is Carolyn Killian, the Director of Bereavement for the Diocese of Bridgeport Catholic Cemeteries. I'm excited to let you know about one of our very successful bereavement programs. 2 years ago, we realized there was a real need to provide support and comfort on a daily basis to those who are living with the loss of a loved one. We now publish a faith-based grief reflection that we call The Healing Journey. Each day we provide a reflection, a poem, a prayer, a song, or a story of real people living with grief. Some who are hoping to become closer to God, and others who are struggling to find Him. We send this via email every morning at 7:30 and are encouraged that thousands of people read it. I invite you to sign up for this free reflection at thegrief.org. That's thegrief.org.
Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency is speaking with Anna Moreland, the author of the Young Adult Playbook, Living Like It Matters. And I have a question for you, Anna. So you said that the book is divided into 3 sections, right? Work, leisure, and love. And we started talking about some of those. And I wonder if there's anything said about the family of origin for the young adults and where that kind of fits into the playbook.
Yeah, Steve. So for sure, as students and young people are trying to think about who they are and who they want to become, that is absolutely anchored in how they were raised. The book is threaded through with journal exercises. They get them to think about childhood activities, to think about mentors, think about people they admire and write about why they admire these people, to think about people who have jobs in their communities that they think are interesting. So to set aside all kind of practical considerations, but just rehabilitate their imaginations on who have they seen who seems happy at work, and just write all those down. Yeah. So all of that draws on their personal, familial, community background.
Mm-hmm. So now, when we had our small little break, I made this observation, so I'm going to mention it here as well, so we can break it open a bit. But it's when I look at the state of society and culture, particularly in the West, and the presumption always is that those of us who are older work to build a world that is better for those who come after us. And I'm coming to the sober conclusion, which I think many have come to the same conclusion, is that despite all our labors, we have created a world far worse than what we had as children. Right? Would you agree, disagree? Would you nuance that? What would you say, Anna, to that?
So I'm temperamentally resistant to declension narratives. In particular, when we're talking about young adults, I think they're so much more hardworking than we give them credit to be. They're so much more resilient than we give them credit to be. But when thinking about my fellow adults and myself, I mean, the technological revolution that we're in the midst of, I think we're not prepared. We weren't prepared. It's like we're in the middle of a tsunami. And I don't know that my parents' generation had that same kind of sense of tsunami. Even if you take artificial intelligence now and higher education, it's so quick, the change. It's just really hard to keep up with this revolution. I feel like we're in the midst of this revolutionary change. And it feels a lot worse. I'm sure there are some ways in which it is better, and technology has helped in a lot of really important ways. But the pernicious effects are the ones that I really worry about.
Yeah, see, I would agree. Yeah, I think to be nuanced about it, it's not all terrible. I mean, there have been advances, and we welcome those, right? But the interesting thing is, and I think of, and again, in the context of what you're referring to, and the emphasis that's being placed in colleges and by parents that you have to be successful, do your best and get a job and all the rest. I stumbled on this, and again, I don't have the evidence for it, but the premise was that since the Civil War, this generation, that is the generation that you are educating, will be materially poorer than their parents for the first time since the Civil War. And if that is the case, that the wealth in the United States and in most of the world is being concentrated further and further into fewer and fewer hands, and the ability to like work your way into, I'm going to say, prosperity or just comfortability is getting harder and harder for more and more. That just feeds into the narrative that you come to college to get a job and to get, do you see what I mean? It's like, that also worries me. I'm not sure if it's true, but if it is true, and it seems to be true, that's another trend that we have to look at, right, for these young people.
For sure. It's just that I think that narrative overly shapes the social landscape and the imaginative landscape of young people, especially the 27% of the adults who are actually going to college, right? And so if you're attending college, you're already in a pretty elite category.
Mm-hmm.
And so those in particular, I think, have been given the privilege of thinking about their lives sort of broadly, the privilege and the space and college is a luxury.
Yes. Yes.
And so why do we not actually encourage them to take that luxury and think deeply about what they want to do with their lives? But I also think their imaginations are radically impoverished with respect to how many jobs are out there that actually pay a decent living. Not everybody has to go to Wall Street to make a decent living and raise a family and educate their kids. There are a lot of paths that can lead to a happy life. And students think that, or young people think, it's sort of finance, physician, or failure.
Right. That's very well said. You see, because this is the way I read it. If you don't, this is one of the questions that are the value question. These are the deeper questions, right? What ultimately is going to make my life intentional or joyful or purposeful or meaningful, and if you don't ask the question, you just accept the narrative of the culture where it is basically saying it's material prosperity is the only thing that matters.
Exactly. And then I have graduates in their 20s and 30s who ask to meet with me because they're miserable in their jobs and they're lonely and they don't know how to meet someone and they have no idea how to start a marriage and family because they haven't put the building blocks in place to get there. And they're making a really decent living, but they're radically unhappy.
Yeah. See, so in a sense, your book and your work is trying to avoid that outcome by doing it in college, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I tell them the habits that they set in college, graduate with them.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. Oh, I have to think about that. Oh my gosh. Now you gave me much to think about when I look back in my own life. Oh gosh. Well, again, it's the way I kind of see it is the pillars of formation for priesthood are the pillars for formation for every human being.
That's right.
Right. And we always kind of reduce things to their lowest common denominator when they're not. Right. And maybe it's a blessing that this generation may have more material challenges than the generation before because it will force the question.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the Great Depression forced the question.
Right.
And reset after the Roaring 20s. And what did that give people? A gigantic headache.
Yeah.
When all was said and done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I teach an essay by Dorothy Sayers called Why Work? And she wrote it. It was a lecture she gave in the early 40s at Oxford, in which she was talking about this meaning of work in the midst of World War II and in the midst of real austerity measures that they were all living under. But one of the arguments of that essay is that she worried about what they were going to do after the war, because these austerity measures really did help everyone sort of focus in on what values, on their real human and spiritual values. And once prosperity hits, it's just really easy to be distracted by Amazon Prime. I mean, I'm guilty of it too.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's some genius in some of this technology. There really was some genius. So if I am, well, I'm 66. I think I'm a tad bit old. But if I'm 35 and I'm struggling with work and leisure and love, this book is for me too, even though I'm
Absolutely.
not 20.
And I will say, in a way that I didn't anticipate, and neither Tom nor I anticipated this when we were writing the book, we did not realize how the scope of it, like how many people, both into their 30s, but also back into high school, were going to really react to it. So what I mentioned earlier on in this conversation about feeling like I had put my finger on a raw nerve, when we go around the country and lecture about the material of this book, without fail, somebody is in tears in the question and answer period or talking to us after the lecture, without fail, either because of somebody they love or because they're in their 30s and really lonely. And we've spoken about something that has graduated with them and they don't know how to get out of it. So the reach of the book was much broader, I think. We thought we were writing a book for college students, but it turns out its reach is much broader.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I would characterize it, and perhaps this is incorrect, but I would characterize it as a very, very significant pre-evangelization.
Exactly.
So that we can speak about the gospel when things are clearer, right?
That's exactly right. So we worked so hard on the question of, do we put our cards on the table with respect to our faith commitments? It was probably the question we worked hardest on, other than just learning to write in a popular book versus an academic book. And we came to a tone that I think works because young people who are really committed to their faith get a lot out of the book, and they have an ear that's attuned to part of the melodies or harmonies in the book. And then young people who aren't committed in any way, they get a lot out of the book and they don't feel alienated.
Yeah, exactly.
It was really hard, honestly, to write in that way, but it was really important to us.
So on a personal level, writing this sort of text, was this more difficult than writing an academic text?
Way more difficult. And we, as the manuscript developed, I shared it with students, hundreds and hundreds of students, and received their feedback. And their feedback was hysterical. I mean, like, Dr. Moreland, you really missed the mark. Well,
that was encouraging.
Yeah, well, just on sort of ways that because adults can, in trying to talk to young people, can try to talk in a voice that's not authentic to who we are. And so I remember one student saying to me, just write this book like you talk to us in class. And that was like a light bulb moment to me. And I thought, that's right. I take you seriously in class. There's like a straightforwardness without the academic jargon, but I can't lose that sort of authentic voice.
Right. It's the great complementarity between the theologian and the catechist.
Right.
So this is catechetical text in a sense, right? Making it accessible. Yeah. And it is very different. Wow. So anything else on young adults? Well, we could talk about this forever, but anything else that you wanted to point out? Or
I mean, it was really a labor of love. It comes out of deep listening to young adults for the past couple of decades. And we want to get it into the hands of as many young adults as possible and those who care about them and love them.
That's tremendous. Yeah, it's tremendous. Tremendous. So now we have a little bit of time, Steve, I think, don't we? So your book on Islamic prophecy, I'm fascinated. First of all, why write the book? And give us maybe one or two highlights.
Yeah. So I am a Catholic theologian. I am trained in the thought of Thomas Aquinas, and I wrote this first book on natural knowledge of God. But even in the first book, I did have a concern about both intra-ecclesial conversation and an interreligious dialogue. And then I taught a series of courses at Villanova that had me asking questions. So I taught a course on the birth and early development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It was a really popular course. It was after 9/11. Students knew that they were ignorant about Islam and wanted to learn. And it was an easy way in because it turns out it was an easy way in. But they thought so because they thought they knew about Christianity. But, they don't know a lot about Christianity either. So and I learned a lot in teaching that course. But one of the things I did is I taught sections of the Quran. And I wanted to think about how can I, as a Catholic theologian, teach this text that is a text that is holy for another community of faith, not my own community of faith, and not the community of faith of the university in which I teach. So not teach it as sort of a sociology of religion, but that's a challenging pedagogical question, a challenging teaching question. And then that question gave rise to a lot of questions. I went back to Vatican II documents about what we say in Lumen Gentium, about Catholics and Muslims adoring the one God together. What on earth does that mean? So I went back to my own tradition's magisterial sources to work through how am I going to teach this class? And then that ended up giving rise to a series of articles and essays that gave rise to this book that really recovered Thomas Aquinas on prophecy. So it still is a book on Aquinas. But I bring Aquinas's account of prophecy from the shadows and then ask the question about what to make of. It's a question, by the way, that Thomas Aquinas himself would not ask, what to make of the prophecies that Muhammad claims to have received in Arabia in the 7th century. So it's a very technical, theoretical question, and it's a work in Catholic theology, trying to answer questions I think that were left open in Vatican II about what do we mean when we say what we say, both in Lumen Gentium and in Nostra Aetate about Muslims. Marrying that to an understanding of prophecy that Thomas Aquinas brings to us. And I even bring in private revelation because I think the theology of private revelation and that comes out of the Marian tradition is really important for the church, even if it's this corner category, to ask the question of should Catholics read the Quran, for example.
Right.
I'm sorry, that was a long answer.
No. But it's a complicated question. No, and it's a complicated question, and I applaud you for even addressing it, to be very honest, I think. And you're doing it in a very academic way, in a very faithful way. Private revelation. So now, you have piqued my curiosity because in contemporary times, in The Passion of the Christ, the film, he used private revelation to try to round out the passion narrative. And to be honest, some of the scenes that came from and I forget who it was that he used, but are the ones that are most striking to me. Like those are the ones I remember. So private revelation has been in the church for a very long time, right?
Yes.
And is almost unknown, I think.
That's right.
So could you give us just a little bit more in that world? When we say private revelation, what are we really saying?
So we're talking about, for example, what happened at Lourdes and Fatima. We're talking about God continuing to speak to God's beloved beyond the closing of the canon. So if we believe that God speaks through history, and we clearly do, because Jesus of Nazareth is a source and summit of the divine revelation, then we have to be open to the possibility that God continues to speak in post-canonical yet real ways in a way that respects the closing of the canon, in a way that is fully aligned with the closing of the canon, fully aligned with the rule of faith in Holy Scripture. So not in a competing way, not in a way that sort of isn't fully consonant. But if Marian apparitions are real, if Mary really does appear to children, whatever Mary says is going to take you to the foot of the cross. Whatever Mary says is going to take you into divine revelation. And that is true not just for Mary, but it's true for Shakespeare as well, right? And it could be true for the Passion of the Christ. Now, I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but what's important, the church, I think, is so wise in its theology of private revelation, because there's no demand to believe private revelations at all.
Correct.
So the faithful can, in certain situations, and the church is very, I think, again, wisely cautious about saying too much about this or that particular private revelation. And yet the category of private revelation is a live one. I think that's incredibly wise. So they're not to be taken as de fide, right? There's no demand to believe. And yet there is a possibility. So whatever, when a Catholic opens up the Quran, a Catholic can experience the wisdom of God in the Quran, as long as that wisdom is in full concert with the revelation of Jesus Christ.
So in a sense, of all these, like even private revelations within our own church, they are private precisely because they're given for the benefit of the person who receives it first, and would be considered in some way, shape, or form worthy of examination beyond the single person, to the extent that it illuminates divine revelation, which is definitive in Jesus Christ, right?
Exactly.
Right. So, yeah, it's fascinating because we think of Lourdes, we think of something that's very public. There are millions of people who go, but it actually started as a private revelation.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And a lot of ink has been spilled about whether we should change that term private, because it's in some ways misleading. But it's linked to private mass, for example. Mm-hmm. And it preserves something really important, because what's important is the revelation, not the private. It's the private gets its meaning and worth through that initial revelatory act of Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a fascinating scope of topics we talked about. So what's on the horizon? What's next for you? Do you have a project in mind, or?
Yeah, so both, we are thinking about a sequel to Young Adult Playbook. We're thinking about a book on commitment, because Young Adult Playbook, for example, encourages young people to ask somebody out on that first date because they've never asked anybody out on a date. But then the question of, how do I decide who I want to marry? Or is this job that I'm already in worthwhile? Should I stay in it? Or are these adult leisure practices life-giving? We're thinking about the sequel for people who are people who are older, because those questions continue with you as you graduate, and in some ways the stakes grow higher, because you really are shaping your adult life.
And you don't have mentors like yourself and professors who are going to help guide you. You're really kind of not on your own, but
you're at sea.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's actually perhaps more difficult post-college, if you didn't have the foundation created in college, to be able to meander the world.
Yes, no, that's for sure. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, I would look forward to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll be looking for the midlife crisis playbook.
Yeah, then Anna, you got to get to Medicare like me, and then you can write the book.
All right. So we're going to take our final break. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency has been speaking with Anna Moreland. the co-author of the Young Adult Playbook, Living Like It Matters. We'll be back on the other side with a listener question.
Hey, it's Matt from Restless on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Each week on Restless, we young adults restlessly seek the face of Christ in today's crazy and mixed up world. Join us each Friday at noon on 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, the Veritas app, or wherever you get your shows. Hope to see you there.
All right, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. Okay, Excellency, here is this week's listener question. It says, so this listener pays attention. It says, Bishop Frank, you said that you've become more patient as you've gotten older.
Miraculously so, but yes.
Versus how you were when you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And then this listener writes, I seem to be going in the opposite direction. Can you tell me how to become more patient?
Well, not knowing the person personally, I could just give you a generic observation. And for me personally, I've always had a very controlling personality. Anyone who comes to my office, there are files everywhere, lists everywhere. And as I've grown older, I realized that there are things that I can't control. And that list of that which I cannot control is growing longer and longer as I grow older and older. And so surrender actually has become easier for me than when I was younger. But it's a peaceful surrender. It's not like an abdication. It's I know God is in charge, right? So for this person, depending on how old they are and depending on their personality, they're going to have to meander the spiritual question of who's in charge of my life, me or God.
Yes. Yep. That's great.
Right.
So if you have a question for Bishop Frank, you can send it in on social media, or you can email questions@veritascatholic.com. Bishop Frank Caggiano is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So is Veritas Catholic Network. And a grant from the St. Therese Fund for Evangelization makes it possible for us to bring Let Me Be Frank to you. The St. Therese Fund is a part of Foundations in Faith, and Foundations in Faith is committed to supporting and transforming pastoral ministries in the Diocese of Bridgeport. To learn more about Foundations in Faith, go online to foundationsinfaith.org. And Dr. Anna Moreland, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Bishop Frank and Steve, so much. I really enjoyed talking with both of you.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
So the book is the Young Adult Playbook from Catholic University Press, and you can get it on Amazon or
Or Catholic University Press website, or Barnes & Noble, or I think Walmart is carrying it. So anywhere you go, just look it up. And we would love to engage with our readership. So both Tom and I, our emails are online. We have a website, theyoungadultplaybook.com. We'd be delighted to talk to anybody.
Wow, that's a great commitment. That is a very big commitment. Good for you.
Yeah. We'll link to all of that in the show notes.
Terrific.
So, yeah.
Excellency, before we go, would you please give us a blessing?
Shall we? Absolutely. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, once again, we give you thanks with deep gratitude in our hearts for the opportunity to serve you, to know you, to love you, and to accompany one another in faith. Continue to bless this day, and especially bless our listeners, and bless Dr. Moreland and her great work. May we each, in our own respective ways, help to build your kingdom in our midst. And we ask that you bless us in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this.